Good morning, everyone. It is Wednesday morning, and I have chosen to read two books about fire. One of them I'm only going to read part of one chapter because it's really long, and then I will read the entire story of the other book. But I just feel like it's really important to read these books because all you have to do is look outside and know that there is a fire pretty close to us, all the way in Willits, but we are getting a lot of the smoke from it. So the first book I'm going to read is called Forest Fire. It's by Fraser. The second book, I'm only going to read a part of a chapter. It's called Fire, Friend or Foe, and the author of that is Dorothy Hinshaw Patent. Okay, so let's start Forest Fire. For 250 years, debris has been collecting on the ancient forest floor. The entire valley was like a fire ring stacked with kindling. High in the trees, pine cones crackled in the heat of the afternoon. Below, a hungry bear and her cubs searched for berries and grubs. The noisy cubs startled an elk munching on a patch of withered grass nearby. With the elk gone, a ground squirrel ventured out from its burrow. Cautiously, he scampered across the brown matted pine needles. Settling on a log, he sunned in one of the few shafts of light that found its way through the dense tree branches. Suddenly, a gust of wind ripped through the trees. There was a sound of splintering wood. The ground squirrel leapt out of the way just as a lodgepole pine, killed by bark beetles, fell to the ground. Crash! There was a hush over the valley. The clouds, like steam from a boiling cauldron, rolled over the mountain peaks. Thunder broke the silence. The elk lifted his head to the sky. The bear sniffed the air. The ground squirrel peeked out from a hollowed stump. There was a blinding flash, and then boom, crack! Lightning struck the top of an old dead pine. The tree burst into flames. The crackling blaze spread from treetop to treetop like the lighting of torches. Sparks rained onto the brittle pine needles and raced across the forest floor. Soon, the entire valley was engulfed in flames and whipped into a firestorm by the strong winds. Boulders exploded from the heat. Smoke inked out the sun. Wind roared through the area like a freight train. The wide-eyed elk bounded past the bear family, who stumbled and rolled their way to a hollow by the creek. The ground squirrel darted into his burrow to escape the flames that raced toward him. For months, pockets of fire smoldered in the roots and stumps of trees. At last, an autumn rain snuffed out the last remaining embers. The narrow valley, once covered by old-growth trees, had quickly become a charred and barren landscape. But the forest had not died. Many of the cones that the lodgepole pines had a resin coating to protect them. The fire had melted the resin. Now the cones sprung open and scattered their seeds. The ground squirrel ate some of these pine seeds and buried others to eat later. Some he never found again. These forgotten seeds would be ready to sprout in the coming spring. Although most of the bushes had been burned, those with deep roots were still alive. Within weeks, they had new shoots poking up among their blackened branches. The elk nibbled at the new stems and leaves and licked the ash for its minerals. Like all of the forest animals, he needed to build thick layers of fat to survive the difficult winter. The ground squirrel and the bears began their long hibernation just before a fierce blizzard draped the valley in snow. An old mule deer who had survived the fire now died from the cold. He became food for a starving coyote. Spring was a time of renewal for the valley. Snowmelt seeped through the ash and carried nutrients for plants into the soil and streams. Since treetops no longer blocked the sun, the lodgepole pine seeds sprouted in the warm, moist earth. Mushrooms popped up beside the rotting, burnt timber and helped break it down, enriching the soil. The bear family awoke from their winter hibernation and feasted on the animals that had died during the winter. Grass seeds carried by the wind burst forth into a lush carpet patterned by wildflowers of every color. Wood beetles, millipedes, mites, and ant colonies had escaped the fire by hiding under rocks or below ground. As the seedlings sprang up, many above-ground insects, which had flown away, returned. The new plants gave them food and places to hide and lay their eggs. Deer and elk grew fat on the grasses, which contained more nutrients than grasses grown in unburned areas. More bats and birds than ever before came to the valley to feed on the many insects. As the woodpeckers drilled holes into the burned-out trees looking for bark beetle larvae, they created nesting sites for songbirds. Mice, chipmunks, and squirrels had bulging cheeks from all the seeds they gathered. Soon, owls, snakes, foxes, coyotes, and weasels came to raise their families and to hunt these small rodents. After 5 years, the pine seedlings were only 1 or 2 feet high. When strong winds blew, burned trees toppled into the creek and calmed its rushing current. The fallen timber, together with the minerals washed into the sun-bathed stream, created perfect conditions for water plants and algae to grow. Water insects, such as mayflies, caddisflies, and stoneflies, ate these plants. They became food for the trout. The mother bear spent many late afternoons alone catching fish, since her cubs had left to find their own territories. A moose gave birth to her calf among some willows. The valley once again could provide food and shelter for many kinds of creatures. The fire had renewed the forest. After 25 years, the valley supported more plants and animals than the earlier old forest. Ground squirrels darted and zigzagged through sagebrush. Elk, deer, moose, and bison grazed in the open fields, surrounded by young fir and spruce, aspen and pine. Over the next 200 years, the sun-loving grasses, wildflowers, and shrubs died as the trees' interwoven branches blocked the sun. Many deer and bison left to find better grazing, but animals like the goshawk, which depend on old-growth forest, moved in. The valley had come full circle. Someday, when conditions are just right, a tiny spark will begin the forest life cycle once again. Okay, so that's the first book, and then I'm just going to read a small part of this book. It's called Fighting Fire. Fire continues to shape the American West today. Even though millions of people live in the western states, many millions of acres of grassland and forest are still unpopulated public land. vulnerable to burning. Even in populated areas, every few years, grassland fires in California burn out of control and destroy homes. The burning is a part of nature in an area with a weather cycle of wet and dry seasons rather than the 4 seasons. In much of California, it's normal for no rain to fall for several months. Combine the dryness with extreme heat and winds, and a simple spark from a discarded cigarette or a hot catalytic converter on a car can cause a furious grass fire. Western forests, too, are prone to fire. After a couple of dry years, trees can be low in moisture content and burn easily. A wet spring, during which shrubs grow rapidly, followed by a hot, dry summer, can also spell disaster. The heavy undergrowth can carry a fire through a forest. Forest managers have no choice but to deal with forest fires in some way. Modern firefighters have many weapons for fighting wildfires when necessary. Satellite communications enable fires to be pinpointed even when they occur deep in forested wilderness. Space-age material protect firefighters from flames and heat, and helicopters and airplanes can drop water, fire-retardant chemicals, and smoke jumpers who parachute in to help put out fires. Lines of defense. When fire occurs near roads, getting firefighters to the scene is easy. The first line of defense against a fire is to create a fuel break. Without fuel, a fire can't burn. So firefighters work hard to create a line that fire cannot cross. They use their heavy axes, called pulaskis, to cut down trees and shrubs and to dig into the ground, breaking up surface vegetation to slow the fire. Firefighters concentrate their work downwind of the fire, in the direction the fire is moving most quickly. And this is a firefighter using his Pulaski. Many fires can be limited by encircling them with a fire break, but some fires burn too hot or too fast to be stopped by a few feet of bare ground. To halt these fires, firefighters set a backfire. A backfire burns the area in front of a wildfire, depriving the wildfire of fuel. Backfires can be tricky. If the wind changes, a backfire itself can burn out of control. During the 1988 Yellowstone fires, a backfire threatened the town of Cook City, Montana, just outside the park. The firefighters' equipment. Modern science helps protect firefighters in their dangerous work. Their clothing is made of Nomex, a material that won't burn or melt even at 700 to 800 degrees Fahrenheit. When it gets that hot, the Nomex forms a charred material that still offers some protection to its wearer. Firefighters wear gloves made of flame-resistant leather and chaps made of nylon on the outside and Kevlar, a tough material also used for bulletproof vests, on the inside. This combination protects firefighters from both the flames and the sharp saw blades they use to cut down trees. Firefighters' main firefighting tool is a Pulaski, which has a hatchet blade for chopping on one side and a hoe for digging up plants and clearing the ground on the other. They also wear hard hats and carry first aid kits. A backpack contains water and equipment as well as any personal gear. In case the fire gets out of control and changes direction suddenly, each firefighter also carries a fire shelter. This lifesaver is made of aluminum foil bonded onto fiberglass cloth. It reflects heat as intense as 1600 degrees Fahrenheit, while keeping the temperature inside the shelter no hotter than a dry sauna, about 170 degrees Fahrenheit. A firefighter can set this low triangular tent up in under 20 seconds if necessary. Dousing a fire. Fires can also be slowed by dumping special fire retardant chemicals on them. A typical mix contains water, a chemical that helps put out the fire and later acts as fertilizer for new growth, a thickening gum that makes the mixture thicker than molasses, and iron oxide, which gives it its red color. The color enables pilots to see where the retardant has already been dropped. The retardant helps slow the fire by smothering it with a layer that cuts down the availability of oxygen. It also reduces heat and adds moisture. When fires burn near lakes or rivers, helicopters carrying giant buckets can dip into the water, carrying 100 gallons of water to the fire and dump it on the flames. Water fights fire by cooling the temperature of the potential fuel and cutting down on access to oxygen. So that's just a small part of this book because it's a very long book, but I just thought it's important to read a little bit about fires. You may notice a lot more people in town who had to escape the fires. So this is a time where we need to be extra kind because there are people that are maybe losing their homes and they just need some kindness. So I hope you guys have a great day and I hope you can find something positive in the day. Okay, bye.